loud, and maybe I'll pause it until we actually start though.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Rachael Montesano, a member of UVM United Against Cuts and United Academics. Today, a coalition of faculty, staff, students, and community members from across Vermont have gathered to defend Vermont education against regressive and harmful budgetary decisions being taken at this time. We are demanding alternatives to the austerity measures being imposed by administrators statewide. Today, we will hear from 9 speakers. We'll take between 20-25 minutes for those speakers to speak about their concerns. And then after that, we'll be taking questions. Please use the Q&A feature to indicate your name and where you're from if you have a question, and we'll be sure to call on you. We'll be prioritizing questions from the press, and then we'll have questions from the community. So please make sure you indicate if you're from the press or not. And just a reminder that this is being recorded. Our first speaker today is Isaac Kreisman. Isaac is a middle school teacher in Virgins and a member of Vermont NEA. Isaac?
Thanks, Rachel. So Vermont schools are facing unprecedented challenges right now. Schools are wrestling with how to educate students in the midst of this pandemic that shows no signs of being finished, while also addressing the social crisis that this period has wrought: food insecurity, financial hardship, the realities that we know directly impact life inside school buildings. So this is a time when schools need to be treated as the vital community resources that they are and really supported aggressively. Unfortunately, there have been mixed signals from the bodies that govern the diverse educational institutions in our state as to the extent to which safe and just schooling is really their priority. As people who work from pre-K to higher education, we want to be clear that this crisis cannot be addressed through austerity. This will be like pouring gasoline onto a fire. The institutions where we work and learn are varied here, and each faces distinct challenges. The particular fiscal realities are specific, but as a group, we're united in our opposition to any cuts that harm students' learning conditions and workers' living and working conditions. The instincts of some leaders in Vermont has already raised serious concerns. These moves include the plans to close state colleges, vital resources for Vermont students and economic anchors of rural communities, the Scott administration's proposal to make districts re-vote on school budgets, the attacks on staff and faculty at UVM, and the early reopening of childcare centers without adequate plans and resources to do so safely. We realize that this pandemic is placing strain across our system. Our state education fund is projecting massive shortfalls, and colleges and universities face serious enrollment anxiety. We also know, though, that the basic thrust of these proposals for austerity is not new. Every year since Governor Scott has been in office, he has tried to find ways to cut school spending, states the Public Assets Institute. The gross inequality between the pay at the top of university systems and the majority of educators and staff is also a longstanding injustice here. Luckily, initial plans for austerity have been met with vocal opposition, starting with the car protests that descended on Montpelier to demand that the state colleges remain open. Now, as always, there are alternatives to austerity. First, we can raise funds by restoring taxes on the wealthy. It should be unconscionable that mansions continue to be built in the hills and lake shores of our state, while students, many working class and poor, could face a degraded quality of education, and workers are facing cuts and layoffs. We can push for further federal bailout money to be used for education. If there are trillions for the private sector, there are no excuses for any cuts in the public sector. At institutions such as UVM with administrative bloat, we can cut salaries from the highest paid administrators. It should be a scandal that workers at UVM earn well below a living wage, while there are administrators who continue to make hundreds of thousands of dollars. Lastly, the state can borrow money to tide us through the crisis. Deficit spending at the federal level has had bipartisan support when banks need bailouts or wars are to be waged. This is clearly an issue of justice and equity, but it is also an issue of safety. If we're to operate schools safely, we need more resources, not fewer. We need more custodial staff. We need more educators to help ensure small classes, careful hygiene, and social distance. We need more mental health professionals who can help students through what has and will likely continue to be an incredibly trying time for them and for their families. Resources are vital for school safety, but also for the safety of the community as a whole. We know that shutting down schools this spring was a critical linchpin in containing the spread of COVID-19 throughout the state. The safety conditions for students and workers inside schools will have immediate reverberations outside of school buildings. So as educators and students, our message here is loud and clear. Vermont's educational institutions are essential for our communities. Cuts to education workers and resources for our students should not be on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isaac. Our next speaker today is Brad Bauerly. Brad is a UVM lecturer in political science and a member of UVM United Against Cuts and United Academics. Brad. Brad, I think you need to unmute. It seems like Brad might be having a little bit of technical difficulties. We'll move to our next speaker and then come back to Brad afterwards. Laurie Essig is a professor of gender, sexuality, and feminist studies at Middlebury College and is the Middlebury AAUP president. Laurie.
Thanks. You can hear me, right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Perfect. The crisis universities and colleges are facing was not just caused by the pandemic. Instead, higher education has been in crisis for years. Administrative bloat, hoarding of wealth through endowments, and an expansion of building not just on campuses, but on sites elsewhere has meant that tuition only ever increases. Since 1989, the cost of tuition has gone up at 8 times the rate of wages in the US. Meanwhile, instructor and staff salaries have been flat. At Middlebury College, which has an endowment over $1 billion, austerity measures have been in place for years. Our healthcare was significantly downgraded. Some longtime employees don't even make $15 an hour, and we're told Middlebury could not yet afford to make that happen. Departments are told every year there will be no expansion in tenure lines, regardless of the state of the economy. What went wrong? How did we get here? The short answer is that universities stopped centering education, focusing more on branding and being real estate moguls, rather than investing in classrooms and the staff and professors who make education happen. As investment in teaching was shrinking, administrative costs were skyrocketing. In 1980, we spent about 1/2 on administration as we did on instruction. Today, administrative spending is nearly equal to instructional spending. Somehow, higher education lost its way. Universities stopped being primarily about education, and we believe the pandemic is the time to change this. That's why we started the American Association of University Professors at Middlebury. Our members believe this is the time to listen to those of us who make education happen. because it turns out the most important part of a student's university experience is their education. The employees who make education happen are not the ones who got us into this mess. That came from the top down. But we believe by listening to us, we can get out of this mess. The Middlebury AAUP is offering our leaders a variety of ideas of how to confront the crisis without following the same old playbook. Our financial future for all of us, our people-centered alternative budget, and a variety of other publicly available tools are being offered as a way to confront the pandemic and the larger crisis in higher education. By allowing decision-making from the bottom up, we can use this crisis to confront the serious problems in higher ed that have been simmering for decades. Now is the time to fix a system that charges too much tuition, has created an unbearable debt load for too many students, and has decimated the professoriate by eliminating secure jobs and replacing them with contingent labor. Middlebury AAUP stands united with all Vermont educators in our fight for the right to an education that is fair, equitable, safe, and people, not profit-centered. Together, we can do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Now we're going to move back to Brad again, and I'll just reintroduce him. Brad Bauerly is a UVM lecturer in political science and a member of UVM United Against Cuts and United Academics. Brad.
Okay, can you hear me now? Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to speak directly to the 72 non-tenure track faculty that were abruptly cut to 75% at UVM. These cuts affecting the 72 non-tenure track faculty from College of Arts and Sciences and the Rubenstein School were sudden and shocking. They were confusing and they were damaging to the UVM community. They came right after faculty had worked very hard, rallied, you could say, to shift to remote learning in the middle of a semester. They helped ease student anxiety over this shift. And we all worked very hard under what were suboptimal conditions. Another reason they were a shock is because the contract unambiguously states, and I quote, "The normal appointment is 1.0 FTE," end quote. It's also a reverse of the practice. There are many UV non-tenure track faculty who have been dedicated teachers for more than 15 years and have always been placed at a 1.0 FTE. These cuts have done a lot of damage to morale across the university. And this comes at a time when we will most likely be called upon to work in difficult and shifting circumstances again in the fall. So to squander this goodwill of the UVM community, instead of having a leadership that engages in the shared sacrifice that they continue to give lip service to, seems short-sighted and not in the best interest of Vermonters and the university. Some specifics. One of the reasons I was hired was to teach international political economy and the politics of food. Both were lacking in the UVM political science department or hadn't been taught for many years. These courses help to round out a political science degree, adding depth and specialty. These courses also run on a 2-year schedule. So I have students that have been waiting, that will be seniors next year, been waiting to take these courses that are now not planned to be offered in the spring. So you can see clearly that this will impact the educational quality of the university. That much seems clear to me. Alternatively, the university can increase class sizes, get someone without the specialty to teach this, but ultimately this means damaging the academic quality of the university, which seems to run counter to what we're trying to do at this moment, which is to retain enrollment or grow enrollment at the university. And it also continues the imbalance at the university. So according to the Century Foundation, UVM already spends less than half of the amount of every tuition dollar on teaching compared to peer universities. This only makes that imbalance worse. Because of the lack of transparency by the administration with the broader faculty in the decision, it's unclear what these specific cuts are meant to achieve. If the goal is to cut the budget significantly, clearly cutting 25% from some of the smallest salaries at UVM isn't going to achieve that goal. For example, an 8% cut to the top 72 salaries generates as much while leaving most of these earners in the top 2% of Vermonters. The College of Arts and Sciences, where most of the 72 or many of the 72 faculty reductions occurred, has enrollments figures showing a slight increase for the fall, not a decrease. Now, we don't know if these numbers are quite solid, so we're not quite sure what's going to happen in the spring, which is why flexibility on the part of faculty is needed and is there, but these types of cuts don't solve an issue that actually exists. We don't have declining enrollments across College of Arts and Sciences, so this actually exacerbates the problem, doesn't make it better. And again, back to the real issue, as outlined in the 2018 AAUP audit of UVM, that showed that UVM devotes less of its operating budget to faculty than any of our public university peers. And that audit also found that if UVM brought its priorities in line with peer average spending on administration, it would generate over $11 million in annual savings. So if we're unsure what the enrollment numbers will be, is it wise to cut vital teaching faculty and the lowest paid faculty instead of smaller trim to much higher salaries of an already oversized university administration? The top executives, top admin executives at UVM make over $200,000 on average and would still make six-figure incomes after a 25% cut. Instead, they're cutting NTT faculty who make on average just over $60,000. Cutting their salary by 25% will push most NTT faculty below a living wage in Vermont. It will push my personal salary below what I could get if I applied for the expanded unemployment insurance under the CARES Act. So they're going to pay me full time when I could get more through unemployment. That's how much they want to cut my pay. It's forcing me to look for alternative labor, putting me out into an already stressed and tight labor market. It's added financial uncertainty. It's led to all kinds of employees seeking alternative and movement across the university. And there's also some members who have stated this will force them to turn to government assistance. This will further contribute to the gross inequality displayed across our society and pulling at the very soul of it. My final point is concerning what are the broader goals of higher education and public institutions. At a time of great uncertainty and what will clearly be a period of institutional instability, to close ranks, reduce transparency, evade faculty governance, and exploit the least well-off for a mere $1 million in savings may give the appearance of doing something, when in reality, it will most likely exacerbate the problems while running counter to the university's mission. Shouldn't a public institution getting COVID relief funds and charged with improving society be a place where investment to stabilize wages on the lower end overrides the short-term budget goals at the expense of academic quality? We need to stop public education austerity, include the voices of frontline workers in these decisions, and move forward together through these trying times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brad. And now we'll move on to Ben Luce. Ben Luce is a professor of physics at Northern Vermont University and an administrator of the Facebook group originally called Protest Vermont State College Permanent Closures, and it's now called VSCS Thrive. Ben?
Good afternoon, everybody. So there are a couple of things I would like to share briefly. One of them, I would like to make sure that people have a clear idea of the level of underfunding that the Vermont State Colleges has endured. And to that, I'm just going to make a quick screen share here. And I would like to just emphasize that public universities are a little bit special in that they are meant to fill a gap of affordability that exists kind of perpetually, especially among lower middle income students who might have a lot of trouble affording a private college or need to stay within their area because they're tied to the land. For instance, students that grow up on farms that would like to remain close to the community. So most state college systems fund their public colleges at a fairly substantial level. Usually the tuition ratio, the ratio of tuition to state funding is usually about 1. The actual national average is precisely 0.97. In Vermont, currently, due to these dramatic reductions in state funding that we've seen over the past 3 decades, the ratio is currently 5.6. So we are, in fact, the highest tuition public system in the country, basically, and the most underfunded, or the 48th or 49th most funded. We kind of compete for that lowest spot. This is really quite tragic, and you can see it in this graph here, which is on the website vscsthrive.org. This is a website we've created to complement the Facebook group by offering a static place where we can organize materials like this. So if you look here in the graph, you can see we've been down over a decade here. We've been down in the low teens, which is really quite shameful for a university system. The other thing that has happened is because of, I think, a combination of maybe some uneven investments, this incredible lack of state funding, and other problems, the system, which has been very corporatized in Vermont, has been basically forced into a mode of having to shut down some of these campuses, or at least try to. That's what we saw back in April, and which gave rise to the car parade, which we organized with the Facebook group. So we've really reached an extreme state, and we really need a large public movement in Vermont to stand up and say that there really needs to be a strong public higher education function in the state, or we're simply going to leave tremendous number of students behind. We're going to leave our rural communities behind. These state colleges have an amazing return on investment, roughly a factor of 10 from estimates, for example, on my university. So they are really important from an economic point of view as well as an educational point of view. They really are the engines in many of these smaller communities in central Vermont, northeastern Vermont, southern Vermont, that keep these communities alive. So it's really, really essential that we step up to the plate and organize to defend them. Unfortunately, we've seen a rather lukewarm response. The governor's response was quite lukewarm. He's actually proposing to fund the colleges this year for the first quarter at about 8% lower than they were funded last year. We are seeing serious discussion of bridge funding by the state treasurer and the legislature. So we do expect there to be some funding to help rescue us through this period. But the other thing people have to realize is we're facing something very special this year. We are looking at a potential massive enrollment hit that is going to essentially destroy the finances of the state colleges for at least about 6 months or a year. This is due in part to the incredible damage done by the former chancellor's closure proposal, which destroyed a lot of confidence in the stability of the system among parents and students, and also the prospect that we may have to remain online this fall. We may have to do that to protect the safety of our students, our faculty and staff, and our communities as well. And if that's the case, we know a lot of students really abhor online learning or remote learning, as they should actually, because they are missing out on a tremendous amount, but that may be the reality. So the argument that we have going forward is that these state colleges, especially a couple of them that have been severely damaged, really need some extra special help this fall. Even though the state finances are tough, they're going to need that boost in order to survive this, or we're going to lose decades of investment and work. We're going to lose a tremendous amount of momentum and economic benefit for these communities. So, so we really need something extraordinary to happen, and that's the message we need to get out to the legislature: is that this is a these in the state funding budget, these colleges need to be prioritized. The last thing I will say is we're not actually talking about that much money. The state colleges represent 0.4% of the state budget presently. They used to represent, higher education in general used to represent about 15% of the state budget. Even with UVM and the state colleges combined, we're now down to 1.5%. So I think there's room, and there are programs that can be curtailed and shuffled around to get us through this crisis. And really, that's what we're asking for, is basically just get us through this crisis, and going forward to fund the state colleges at just the moderate level, at least, that they would need relative to campuses in other states, so that we can properly compete. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Now we're going to move to Natalie Stroud. Natalie is a preschool teacher in Burlington's Old North End and is speaking on behalf of the Vermont Early Education Coalition. Natalie.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate it. So I'm Natalie Stroud. and I've been a preschool teacher in Burlington for 6 years now. I'm not going to rehash most of the facts and figures that are already out there. I encourage you to read the letters from people who actually work in child care centers, but I will share with you the reason why I have personally chosen to plead with Governor Scott about the June 1st reopening date. So our nation right now is experiencing collective trauma. Trauma happens when what we individually assume to be true about the world or ourselves is challenged, making it hard to cope and impossible to go back to how things were before. We will all be changed forever by this pandemic. That's trauma. My students are home right now learning that sometimes parents lose their jobs. They're learning that you can't always trust the grown-ups in charge to tell the truth or take care of us. They're learning what it feels like to be isolated and lonely. They're learning that sometimes people don't always get better when they get sick. That is all traumatic. People often say that kids are resilient, they'll be fine. And yes, kids do have the capacity for resilience, but don't be fooled. Their body will remember that trauma for the rest of their lives. So much social and emotional learning takes place in the first 5 years of life, which is why it's essential that children receive high quality, trauma-sensitive care in early childhood. When we send our children back to school, we need to make sure the environment can provide that for them. They deserve that. Right now, our country is showing that we do not value their education. We do not value the quality of their care. Preschool age children need touch. They need to play with their friends. They need their bodies to be comfortable and unencumbered by masks in order to learn. They need to see their teacher's mouth move in order to learn language. They need to be able to nap at school. They need their special education providers to help them in the classroom. They need to see their teachers smile. They will need all of this even more after what they have gone through these past couple months. The schooling experience that we would be sending them back to on June 1st would not be that place. Teachers are scared and worried, rightfully so. We will be overworked and underpaid in masks and long sleeve button down shirts in the middle of summer nonetheless. Two of these things aren't new, of course. We have always been overworked and underpaid. But at this moment in history, we have a chance to change that. Help families with unemployment if they choose not to or cannot send their child back to school yet. Compensate teachers fairly. Provide more stabilization funds to programs that cannot open yet. Continue paying open programs a stipend for each child enrolled in that program as the cost of care has risen. The early childhood education system has always been in survival mode, but the response to this pandemic, if handled with care, can help programs thrive for the first time in history. We're asking Governor Scott to help us make history and change the landscape of early childhood education in Vermont forever by hearing our pleas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Now we're going to move to Kit Harrington, who is a speaker from the Coalition of Families for Vermont's Future. Kit?
Hi, can you hear me? Great. Good afternoon. Today I'm speaking on behalf of the Coalition of Families for Vermont's Future, a group of parents, caregivers, and educators deeply concerned about the state's plan to reopen child care centers on June 1st. While we feel strongly that those programs that can safely reopen should be supported and incentivized in doing so, we also believe that the current model for reopening will leave many families and providers without options and may well contribute to a collapse of the field across the state. We are here in solidarity with the teachers and faculty from early childhood through higher education, taking a stand against regressive cuts to our education system, and with the hundreds of educators who flooded the governor's office with letters asking for more time and support to address this crisis. As of today, there have already been reports of a COVID outbreak at a child care center here in Vermont, while other long operating programs have begun to explore or move forward with plans to close for good. The reality of our circumstance is clear. We need more help. The idea that the childcare industry has already gotten their share is a fallacy based upon the shaky structural foundation of a market-based system. Vermont is already an expensive, challenging place to raise a family with limited career options and very few childcare spots. Many of the centers working toward reopening operate on razor-thin margins, and while the restart grants provided are appreciated, they do not begin to cover the financial losses they will encounter in the face of decreased capacity with fewer teachers and families participating. We do not know what the future of COVID-19 in Vermont will be. We do know that without additional support, our system of early childhood care and education may not have a future. The choice to reopen centers without a plan in place to support families and educators who cannot safely return, to provide educators with the professional support and safety net they deserve, or to ensure equitable access to available spaces, puts the entire sector at risk. The governor regularly calls out our state's demographic crisis, but if we do not put children and families at the center of our decision-making process, the long-term outlook for our state is bleak. During a press conference last month, Governor Scott asked the legislature to work together on a statewide plan to rethink, reform, and strengthen our entire education system, cradle to career. If we truly hope to accomplish this task, our state must actively step up its support for families and the education system as a whole and invest in our shared future. As parents of young children, we ask that the state extend stabilization funding to provide centers and parents with the time and resources they need to work out equitable, safe plans that center the health and safety of our children and communities. There's still time to act. Please stand today with educators, families, and children in committing to a future where we all can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kit. Now we're going to move to Finlay Buchanan-Jacobs. Finley is a University of Vermont student and a member of UVM United Against Cuts. Finley.
Hey everyone. I want to first thank everybody for participating and showing up. This is really awesome that we have so many people supporting this. As Rachel said, I'm a student at the University of Vermont. I'm a rising junior environmental engineer. And I guess I wanted to talk about the perspective as a student and how this has impacted the student experience at UVM. So on March 11th, students were notified that we were going to be transitioning to online classes effective March 18th. That was a pretty short period of notice, especially for faculty who had to make extreme adjustments and adapt their coursework, their schedules, and their flexibility to meet the burden that COVID-19 had imposed. And what I saw as a student was a group of teachers that went above and beyond and selflessly dedicated themselves to furthering the educational mission of the University of Vermont. I constantly had teachers reaching out to me, not only providing educational support, but providing emotional support and making sure that everything was okay for their students in this time of crisis. They did so selflessly without any expectation of additional compensation for their hard work and additional efforts. And how were they rewarded? They were rewarded with a pay cut. 72 lecturers, non-tenure track lecturers, were given a pay cut as a response to a self-inflicted budget crisis. And this is not a budget crisis as the UVM administration would like to have you believe. This is the result of years of misguided priorities and administrative bloat. In the last decade, the top 10 and top 50 salaries at UVM have increased by 43.7% and 15.2% respectively, while the average salary of a UVM employee has decreased by 2.1%. The administration has made a point of cutting back our percentages of tenured track professors and lecturers, making more individuals vulnerable to pay cuts and termination. This is extremely troubling to me as a student because I have had nearly all my courses taught by lecturers and professors who are now vulnerable to having their situation greatly impacted by administrative pay cuts. Make no mistake, this is not a budget crisis. This is a calculated and opportunistic assault on the very individuals that constitute the backbone of our university, our community, and our state as a whole, and it should not be tolerated. we need to make sure that in times of crisis, the most vulnerable members of our community are not adversely impacted by austerity measures. As we know, especially with COVID-19, certain demographics have faced increased impact because of the results on economic and financial insecurity. And we have to ensure as a community that we are supporting those individuals, making sure that they have food on their table and a roof over their heads, and making sure that any further pay cuts or any pay cuts at all come from the top, where they will have the least amount of impact on the individuals who are receiving the pay cut. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Finley. And now we'll move to Kele Bourdeau. Kele is a paraeducator and a member of the Burlington Education Association. Kele?
Hi, thank you, Rachel. Hello, my name is Kele Bourdeau. I'm a paraprofessional at Integrated Arts Academy in the Early Education Program. I'm a proud member of the Burlington Education Association. During the last several months, there's been a lot of gratitude for educators as parents have needed to implement the curriculum and learning activities created by the educators during the distance learning model forced by the global pandemic. Now more than ever, families are very aware of the highly specialized professional work done by the workers in our school communities, from teachers to paras to principals, all of the support staff. Unfortunately, history has shown us that when it comes to budget season, our communities often struggle to remember the essential and challenging work done in our public schools. So let's remember that now is not the time to forget our public schools. The global pandemic has impacted our economy, but has also highlighted the necessity for vibrant and well-funded public schools. As our most economically vulnerable families are struggling to feed, house, and clothe their children, the public schools are there to fill the gaps. As the pandemic highlights our community members without insurance, the public school nurses are there to provide first-line medical care. As our communities struggle with increased poverty, the public schools are there to provide the education needed to break the cycle and provide hope to our students. As the pandemic destroys and recreates our economics, the public schools will be there educating our youth for those new economic needs. Now is not the time to cut funds for the public schools. Now is the time to raise public schools up and let them do the essential work that combats our society's inequities and prepares our communities for the future, regardless of what that future may bring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kele. And now we'll have our final speaker, Dwight Brown. Dwight is the Burlington Schools American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees Local 1343 Chapter Chair. Dwight.
Hello, I want to thank everybody for being here today. I'm here today to talk about the austerity that's happening at every level of education in our state. But I really want to highlight some of the things that are happening to the members of 1343, starting with the mayor's request and demand that they open collective bargaining agreements to our city workers and give back raises and on-call pay, or they're going to face layoffs. This is just unheard of. Those collective bargaining agreements were bargained in good faith, and to open them up would be only the beginning of an attack on collective bargaining throughout not only the state and educational system, but every union in the state. And I just want to offer that the savings that come from these 250 employees would make the same cutting if they would just cut 3 upper management positions. So cutting those 3 upper management positions in the city would have the least amount of impact on our economy and on the people who work there. And I also want to recognize that the people that they want to make these cuts on are the essential workers that were out there during this pandemic, and making sure all of us was okay. And they're being rewarded by asking that their collective bargaining agreements be opened and their raises and on-call pay be taken. So in an answer to that, before I move on, I just want to invite everybody and let them know that on June 9th, we're going to have a picket to resist this request to opening bargaining agreements. More will be coming out about that. That's going to be put on by our local 1343 in the city of Burlington. And we're going to just consolidate and let the mayor know that we're not down with that. And Me, myself, I represent 4 contracts within the Burlington School District, custodial staff, food service workers, bus drivers, and IT, all of which pretty much worked through this pandemic and risked their lives and risked taking this disease back to their families. And most of them didn't get any type of extra pay for doing that, any hazard pay. Our contracts are up for negotiation right now. I've been trying to reach out to them, and they, at this point, has not started negotiations, which would be done, usually be done by now. And I understand that, but we need to get negotiations going, and we need to make sure that these people who fed our children throughout Burlington, the food service workers throughout this pandemic, they went to work every day. The people who cleaned these buildings and made sure they were safe for people to enter worked every day. The IT department who absorbed the burden of switching to online learning and making sure all of our kids and our families had a device that they can take advantage of this online learning. I also want to give a shout out to our teachers who had to adjust to this. So we support the BEA and all of our teachers who work through this. And we call on the city to stop the austerity and cut from the top. That would make the least impact on the people that are doing this work. We also would like to remind people that cutting from the top in Burlington School District is what they should do. That's where the bloat is, and that's where the people making the most money is. And I would hope, and I call on the administration to come to the table and negotiate with us and take care of the heroes that were out there during this pandemic, working and making sure everybody was okay. I want to give a shout out to our food service workers who fed our children throughout this, and people who were could not put food on their table, could get a meals, 3 meals a day through this, and the people that supported them. So I support the BEA. I support our friends in higher education for the austerity they're going through. And Local 1343 is here in defense of labor, not only in the city of Burlington, but in our state and in our entire education system.
Very much, Dwight. Dwight, would you mind giving us that information about the rally again, the date and the time?
Yes, I put it in the chat. It is the second thing in the chat. I can repost that if you like.
Well, the attendees won't be able to see the chat. So just if you want to state it again really quickly.
It's going to be a picket June 9th in the city. More information will be coming out of it. I'll make sure that that information gets to all of you. It's going to be for all members of all unions to come out and support each other. And now that I bring that up, I think the important thing here today is that all of us support each other going through these attacks of austerity, and that when we put on things like a picket that's going to happen June 9th in the city of Burlington, that all of us come and support, that you have your members come and support. And when you do things, that we all come and support you as we try to protect not only education, but these attacks of austerity, and support each other. You're muted.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you to all panelists, everyone who spoke today. Thank you very much for coming and speaking about the struggles within your sector. And like Dwight said so beautifully, we are all here unified. This is a coalition. We're working together to get the message out clearly so that we can make these changes. And in a few cases, we have people who have very urgent deadlines. The June 1st deadline for the early education educators, and also for the AFSCME educator. It's important that we focus on those as well right now. Okay, so now we are going to go to our question and answer period of this press conference. And as I said before, if you have a question, please type your name and where you're from in the question and answer place, and we will get to you. And we're prioritizing the media. So Let's see.
There was a question from Cobalt that I think we can answer.
Okay.
I had answered it by saying we would get back to him. That's why it doesn't appear in the open list.
Thank you. Cobalt, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Can you unmute? Yes.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Cobalt.
Great. Yeah, so I'm just going to restate my question. I was just thinking of the success of the Vermont State College's car rally that was so critical in making sure that the permanent closure of those facilities didn't go through. And given that there seems to be a common thread involving the need for state relief for nearly every segment of the education statewide, is there a way that we could sort of replicate a car rally, or even just something basic, a collective next step moving forward from this very wonderful panel that we just had? Whether that be a car rally demanding state funding for teachers and staff and students, and not administrators, making sure that that's very clear, or just solidarity online, ways that we can sort of stitch together as much sort of solidarity in this regard as possible.
I'll take that one. I'm also the vice president of AFL-CIO, vice president. I'm on the board of directors there. That is something that we're going to be discussing and planning for. I don't have any specifics on that right now, but I've been in discussions with our president, Dave Van Dusen, and our vice president, Tristan Aid, about these, putting something like that together, some type of car rally. And we'll get that out to all of you. We'll probably funnel that through Helen Scott. But we are aware that we need to do something, and the AFL-CIO Vermont.
Dwight, you're kind of coming in and out, but I think everybody heard mostly.
I was saying that as vice president of AFL-CIO and a executive board of Vermont AFL-CIO, we are aware that some type of car or some type of unity demonstration is needed. And I want to thank everybody here for being there. I'll try and get something as I talk to our president, Dave Van Dusen, and our vice president, Tristan Aid, and the rest of the executive board of the AFL-CIO. As we plan something, we'll get that out. Hopefully we'll have Helen get that out to you as soon as we can, but we want to take the lead on this type of solidarity movements and get all of labor on board to stay together and send a message to the state, to the city, to the towns about these austerity measures that are going on.
Great, thank you very much. Next, we have a message from, a question from Ashley Smith. Ashley?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Ashley.
Thank you all for an incredible series of statements. I don't think I've ever seen such unity among educators and such powerful speaking from the heart about the injustices being done to workers in all these institutions. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all those statements. I think that we really have to stand together in the way Dwight said. If anybody's attacked, we're all attacked in this kind of circumstance. And we can't let anybody pit any of us against each other. And in that light, I think the struggle that AFSCME 1343 is facing is one of the most important in the state, because what the Weinberger administration is demanding is that they reopen a negotiated contract so that the city can impose wage cuts, layoffs, furloughs, which will not only damage the workers, but damage the essential services that those workers provide for all of us here in the city of Burlington. And I just want to say that Burlington, this struggle is a bellwether struggle. We have to draw a line in the sand and say to Weinberger and the city government that we will not let these workers' contract be ripped up, and we will not let them be laid off. So my question to everybody on the panel is, can we get all the unions on this press conference to endorse the rally that 1343 has called, and not only to endorse it, but mobilize every single possible member so we can have the largest car protest yet in defense of our brothers, sisters, and siblings at 1343.
Ben, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so this common theme of austerity, fighting austerity cuts during this, is something that really unifies all of us. Another thing is the economic impact on everybody during a pandemic. And I think we really need to raise the volume on this notion that this is where a social safety net needs to be in place, is during a time like this. And really on these fundamental grounds, fighting any kind of austerity cuts during this. The money's out there. This is clear with UVM and Middlebury. If you look at those endowment questions, I think with the state, even with the state colleges, I think even though the budgets are very tight, I think the funding is potentially out there. There is some federal funding already coming to aid. There could be more of that. There may need to be more of that. We may need to really give some grassroots support to people like Bernie and others that are fighting for that, and raise the issue. We may not succeed, but we have to go down fighting if that's the case. We really have to stand up. I really like the idea of a massive unified event around the car parade that Dwight has been talking about, and Ashley. I had some similar ideas. I had an idea that maybe we could have runners and marchers from each of the VSC schools and UVM and the other schools all coming together in Montpelier and doing some kind of event there, and then maybe having a car parade during that. But I'm not so sure that we need to do that. It may be that simply focusing on one massive car parade might be the logistically simple one. I think what we need to make it work, though, is we need a really high volume social media campaign behind that will amplify that message and get it out to other sectors of the state where it's not getting through. For instance, what we're seeing in our fight is that we're having trouble getting our voice heard in other parts of the state where the Vermont state colleges aren't very prominent, and I'm sure that works in reverse for the other parties here. So let's do it. Let's put our heads together, see what we can organize, and have at it.
I just want to reiterate what we're talking about here. We're all in unions, right? Collective bargaining is a big part of what we do. What we're talking about, no matter what level this was to happen, if this would happen at UVM or anywhere for a police union, for a fireman union, the fact that they want to open a collective bargain agreement, right? I just want to be clear about what this attack would mean for all of us. If we let one, no matter where it is, one administration open an already ratified collective bargaining agreement, that will open the floodgates for all of us. That is the level of what we're talking about on June 9th. That is what we're looking at. You want to talk about austerity? The one protection we had was collective bargaining. That if you got an agreement, they had to hold themselves to it. What that would mean is, no matter what was negotiated and what was ratified, they can open it up and change it if they wanted to. That's what we're talking about here. This is the tip of the spear of our fight and what we're talking about. So please, please, please go to the AFL-CIO Vermont website, get on board with this picket. This is the center of the target of where our fight is right now. If we allow them to open a already bargained agreement, we all will be under attack. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dwight. Natalie.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to mention quickly that early childhood educators don't have unions. We are out here on our own, rising as teachers from the bottom. It's been really, really challenging to get our voices heard. without any collective bargaining power, without a union, without a group. So I just wanted to mention again that, you know, we're extra vulnerable. I stand in solidarity with everybody, but it's not an assumption that we have a union. We don't. That could be something that we work for in the future, but right now our biggest thing is just addressing this June 1st issue head on, as teachers rising up and saying our children should not be put in danger for profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. We have a comment from an attendee, Charlotte Sullivan. She says, just a note to say that Middlebury staff are also not unionized, but she hopes that this mobilization will start pushing employees to choose to unionize. Thank you for your comment, Charlotte. Brad?
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to sort of even broaden this question to just include even more people. So ironically, in the fall, I'm scheduled to teach a global justice seminar, which a cornerstone of political theory regarding justice is Rawlsian theory. And Rawls argues that there's a moral imperative to act against inequality. So I'm supposed to teach this political theory that argues we have a moral imperative to fight inequality and rising inequality, while at the same time my own institution is further contributing to that growing inequality. So we need to broaden this question. Everybody that's concerned about inequality and injustice should be out on the street on June 9th and be involved in this car protest that we're planning to fight against this type of inequality and the state cuts that are forcing more inequality across the board here.
Thank you, Brad. And now, Laurie?
I just wanted to clarify Charlotte's comment. Not only are the staff not unionized, although they could be, and any union organizers out there might want to get in contact with me, or and I will help you get in contact with people. But we can't unionize either. We're a private college, and because of a variety of Supreme Court decisions during the Ronald Reagan era, we also can't unionize, or it would be almost impossible. But we can create collective bargaining, and it's really not collective bargaining, collective action. And Natalie, what you have done with pre-K is very impressive, and we're doing it with staff and professors at Middlebury and across Middlebury institutions. So I do think there's something to be said for getting together, even if you can't unionize, and figuring out what you can do as a group. Thanks.
Thank you, Laurie. Helen, would you like to speak your comment, or would you like me to say it?
I think I can. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just this question of non-unionized and unionized. And the reality is that if they can get away with attacking unionized workers, it's going to be open season. You know, in other words, non-unionized workers will be so much more vulnerable if they can start ripping up collective bargaining agreements. And that's why it's really crucial that unions are supporting and standing in solidarity with the struggles of non-unionized workers like Natalie is describing. And, you know, and Laurie, I mean, there's a lot of unrepresented workers here, and unions offer the first line of defense for workers. And when they start tearing that away, it gets a lot worse for everybody. So all of those of us who are in unions, we have a real responsibility to stand up for unrepresented workers, but it's also in our own self-interest, because we are going to be much stronger if we're standing next to each other, rather than what usually happens, which is when unions stand up for rights, there's this argument, right, that, oh, that's just privileged, you know, well-paid union workers. What about those of us who aren't in unions? The reality is that it gets a lot worse for everyone if we don't have unions. So yes, unionize, but also those in unions stand up for those who aren't.
I just want to add that a lot of the rights and privileges that non-union workers have right now, if you have a fire extinguisher in your work area, unions got that for you. If you have pay protections, unions got that for you. So a lot of the raises that our union got, and we negotiated for all our contracts, non-union people in our district got that same amount of a raise. So the impact on unions goes farther than just its members. It goes for everybody in labor.
So I wanted to comment on our union at the state colleges. We can't strike. So we have a union, but its power is extremely limited. And I've always questioned this, and I've wondered about whether we should fight for having the right to strike and become much more of a fighting union. And I think we do, we should. It's been pointed out to me by Ashley Smith, actually, among others, that we would probably enjoy a lot of community support. We wouldn't necessarily be just tagged as being a self-interested or selfish party. And I look at Natalie's situation, her industry. There's many industries like this we probably should be pushing for unionization. And on the other side of the coin, I think we should be pushing for decorporatization. I don't think public higher education should be built on a corporate business model. It's not meant to be. It's intrinsically not really a for-profit kind of business. We should be viewed as a public good, just like secondary schools, and there should be a mandate to have a rainy day fund built up over time, basically an endowment that's specifically earmarked for helping us get through crisis periods.
Thank you, Ben. We actually have a question for Natalie Stroud. Can Natalie Stroud please tell the audience how we in the wider community can work in solidarity to help fight against the June 1st transition and also help support the collective action work of early childhood education workers?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, it's so exciting to have a seat at this table even and have people asking thoughtful questions about early childhood education. Like, this is so thrilling to me. I love this. We have a number of campaigns out there, letter writing campaigns, call campaigns that are happening directed towards the governor. You know, he has the power to make these decisions right now. So I can figure out a way to get those things out to you, and I think that would be really helpful. But also just calling and the governor and saying that you support us is huge. I think a lot of people right now think that our biggest issue is masks, or where are we going to get these long button-down shirts that preschool teachers are now going to have to wear and change every day, multiple times a day. The most important thing to us right now is not getting masks, although that is hugely important. It's the value behind this. So having people from the community calling and sending our letters who are not in childcare and are still concerned about this issue, standing in solidarity with us, I think would be hugely important. And again, I can try, and I'm not sure how to get our letters to the people who are watching this right now, but I can do my best to make sure that that gets out there a little bit in a broader sense, and that would be really helpful. Thank you.
So I have to go in a minute, but can I just address this no strike clause in contracts for just a second?
Yes, please do.
That's correct. You might have a no strike clause in your contract, but that's while you're under contract.
Dwight, you're breaking up.
I was saying that no strike clauses in contracts apply to when you are under contract. If your contract negotiation goes and it expires, you can then strike. So people think that they can't strike. You can't while you're in the contract if you have that clause in there. But if your contract expires through a faulty negotiation breakdown, you can then strike. I have to go. I want to say it was a pleasure being here. I have an appointment I need to get to. It was a pleasure meeting all of you, and let's stay in contact. Rachel, I hope you can get everybody's information and maybe email everybody so that we can stay in contact. That'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you. Also, I was hoping that everybody could maybe type, who's interested in receiving this information, could type their email addresses in the chat, and we'll make sure to get the information about the strike out to everybody.
And I wanted to follow Natalie's statement and say we've organized in responses in solidarity with early childhood educators and providers across the state. And you can contact, we're encouraging families and parents who are also looking to stand with our ECE community to contact us at familiesforvt@gmail.com. And we can continue to share action and future opportunities that way as well.
Okay, thank you so much. We're kind of wrapping up now, and is there any other panelists who'd like to say something who haven't really had that much of an opportunity to speak? Kelly, do you have any thoughts on solidarity with the schools?
I love the idea of unions becoming a union, unifying together. I am also a parent of 2 children in the school district that I work in. My older son has multiple disabilities, so we have utilized special education from birth on up, and seeing the level of experience and education and knowledge and caring and compassion that these teachers and educators and support staff pour into their students, it's just, it's soul breaking that we're having to fight to do our jobs to the best of our capabilities. So yeah, I think the only thing we can do is stand in solidarity together and fight for that value that we know is important, which is providing our children with a safe and appropriate education that creates healthy, well-rounded individuals in the end. And I agree with what Natalie was saying, the cost, in preschool, the cost of potentially teaching these children that we need to be fearful of each other because we might carry something that could make each other sick isn't worth getting them into the classrooms that soon. It's detrimental to their well-being, to their emotional well-being, to their growth. It's such a developmental age of being a sponge. They take everything in, and if it's put in the wrong manner, it's twisted in their minds, and it's not their fault. It's just that they're not developmentally ready for that. And I fear putting them back into the classrooms too soon when we can't provide for what they need. I know my older son would struggle not being able to see somebody's mouth, and he's going to be going into 6th grade. So I think it's very important that we recognize how much we value our children and what it means to actually support them, and not just the young ages, but our college kids too. I'm feeling for my nieces and nephews that are living a very different college experience than they did a couple years ago. And it's only going to change from here on out. So thank you for letting me have a little bit of say there.
Thank you very much. Any of the other panelists, would any of the other panelists like to offer any additional thoughts? Ben?
Just to respond to the idea of strikes, Ashley mentioned I think in the chat that unions came from strikes. It didn't come the other way around, and that's something I think I'll keep in mind, and I hope other people in my institution keep in mind. And we have seen illegal strikes producing good results in other states and other teachers unions and things like that. And there comes a time.
Okay, thank you so much, Ben. Once again, I would like to thank all of the panelists for being here and for speaking, and also for taking all the questions. We appreciate your work so very much. And thank you for all the people who attended. Thank you so much for listening and for your questions. And we look forward to just working together and really making this coalition a strong and powerful coalition. Thank you so much. Have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, Rachel, for moderating.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Thanks all.